Here we go. Welcome everyone to Brain Northwest programming. My name is Reggie Costanzo. I am the Community Support Director here at Brain Northwest, and we are joined today by Katerina Turner. She is a loved and long loved teacher here at Brain Northwest. She has her master's in education, a rich experience professionally supporting patients with case management and using her education to promote opportunities for growth and finding a sense of place in many communities. The veteran community is where she's currently working, and she has lived experience. A family member has a brain injury, and so she comes at this with a lot of personal heart and experience. So thank you, Katerina, for being here, and I'm grateful to be learning along with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you, Reggie, and it's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. As Reggie mentioned, I'm Katerina, and for our time together, I just want to talk a little bit about identity and the felt sense of who we are and how that sense holds up when change or just life happens. I've spent a lot of time, I like to reflect a lot. So I've spent a lot of time on these questions myself, and some of what I say today, you may have absolutely reflected on. So today I just like to give it language and make room for you to think alongside me. So for most of my life, I thought I understood what identity was, and it's still this ongoing, do I even really know? I'm here teaching about it today, so I hope so. I thought it was the answer you gave when someone asked who you were, like your name or your work, or the people you belong to or the places you've been. And I always hated the dreaded question, and I still do. Tell me about yourself. What do I even say? What do you want to know? There's so much to even sum up in that, one exchange. So really just thinking about what that even means. Life can change the sentence. It changed mine and it changed it again. What I'm saying, how I'm presenting myself, how I label my identity. It changed the people that I loved and the person that I thought I was going to be. And it kept on changing and it continues to change. So by no means is your identity fixed. I like to think of identity as the hand that keeps writing. So identity has always been made of many parts, and you can see it here in this laundry list of things. I've added here to this photo. It comes from various parts from within us, whether that's our values, our temperament, our memories, the way that we experience the world, the things that we notice, the things that we care about. Maybe it could have been something as simple as the things that we were told, when we were younger, where we're pulling our experiences from. Other parts grow through relationships with people who know us well or the communities that we belong to. Again, back to culture. Culture is so very important. The traditions that we carry forward and the places that have shaped us. So depending upon, we were just talking about, me here in South Carolina and over in Washington. So really just your environment shaping who you are and your identity. Then there are the parts built through living. So the skills that we practice, the work that we've done, that could be, the choices that you've made, or even the experiences that you've survived. And none of those pieces exist by themselves. They are not isolated. Over time, they begin to overlap and influence one another. One may fade away, one may enhance more of your identity, and then gradually become the person that we recognize as ourselves. Another one too, there's just so much to pull here from is our hopes, our curiosity, the things that matter to us, and the idea of possibility. Sometimes even if you're later in life, there's still so many possibilities, maybe things that you still think of, like, oh, this would be really nice, or this is something that I've always wanted to do. Identity has never only been about where we've been, it's included where we're going and how we're still growing. So even in the circumstance of a brain injury, a serious illness, or the loss of a role, perhaps after an illness that maybe felt once inseparable of who we were, it can become it can become very large in one's mind and it can seem to eclipse everything, which is completely understandable. But then you may begin to look at yourself solely through that single lens. And no single part has ever carried the whole weight of who you are. And it never did before, and it doesn't now, even though sometimes it may absolutely feel like it. So, alongside those changes are values, relationships, memories, perspectives, interests, and ways of loving that remain part of the same person. So, it reminds us that change has never been the only truth about a person's identity. So here you could see a diagram. This yellow dot may be somewhere along this line, depending on, where you're at. So I'd like you to really think about, are you the same person you were when you were 8 or 18 or 25 or when you were falling in love for the first time? In one sense, yes. Same body, relative. Same name, same continuous thread of memory. But in another sense, absolutely not. That 8-year-old could not have imagined the person that you would become. And the person you are today would not be who she is if any of those chapters in between had gone differently, whether that was good or bad. Think about falling in love or losing someone you loved, starting a new job, ending a new job, moving somewhere new, becoming a caregiver, watching a child grow up, watching a parent grow old. They're all different chapters in the same book written by the same author who's absolutely still writing. And if any of that is true, then the question in front of you right now is not the question you may think it is, which is, how do I get back to a specific period in time of the before? And the question that I'd like you to really think about is, who am I becoming from here? And the question was already yours to answer long before anything hard happened. It doesn't have to be a specific injury or instance of getting to the before. It could have been, how do I get back to the before of my identity when I was 25 and I had a very muscular body? Just really thinking about what is different now and then being intentional and being aware of where you're wanting to go. So your brain has this whole system kind of whose only job is to answer one question. And this is called the default mode network. But that's technical, and we're not going to get anything to any technical today. So just think about it as, who am I? That system is working right now as you're listening to me, and it works when you're daydreaming on a walk or when you're falling asleep at night, or even my favorite, this happens to me all the time, is when you smell something. And it could be enchanting or familiar, or maybe not so enchanting, and it brings you back to a specific time or a memory from 20 years ago. Your brain does this nonstop asking who you are from the day you are born until the day that you pass. So I like to think of it as three people kind of directing or making this documentary of your life. The first is the director, which is the prefrontal cortex. And she's the part of you that notices and that pays attention, that connects one moment to another and asks what it means. So every time your mind kind of wanders off and you have those thoughtless thoughts about, who am I? What do I want with my life? That's your director at work. The second is the planner, also the prefrontal cortex. And here's the part of you that thinks about who you want to become, kind of that premeditation, not just who you are today. And the planner writes the next chapter before you get there. And the third is the archivist, or the hippocampus. And she's the one who stores all of your memories. So the raw footage, the documentaries made from, everything meaningful from the moment you've experienced. It's somewhere back there where the archivist can find it. Now, brain injury or even just aging in and of itself can make some of these a little wonky. Sometimes the pace can slow, or maybe the archives don't pull as easily. But the director works differently than she used to. The three people who make the documentary of you are still there, still working. The film is still being shot in the room while you're listening. So a lot of things move through life. And I like to think of it as the weather and sky. We have weather of every kind, and that's hard hours and good hours and symptoms that can come and go, and emotions that arrive and leave just as quickly as they arrive for no reason whatsoever, whether you're in a grocery store and the emotion really isn't matching, or memories that surface out of nowhere, whether that's grief or just kind of the fatigue of daily life. But the research on identity and the self has been telling us that underneath all that weather, there's a part that stays with us, and psychologists like to call it the observing self or the continuous self. And it's the part of you, like we mentioned earlier, that's paying attention to your own life for as long as you can remember. So when everything outside of life shifts, it can feel almost like the person inside is going with it. And she's not. The inside part has always been there. It's one of the most durable things that any one of us have. So let's look at what stays. If someone asks us today, who are you? What would you say first? Like I said earlier, I know I would probably say, I'm Katerina. I'm a mom. I'm an instructor. I do case management. I'm a sister. I'm a friend. Whatever it was relative for that moment is how I would introduce myself. So because roles are the visible part of our lives, they're really what takes the shape of our day and kind of how the world knows us. But our roles shift. There might be work we can no longer do, or a way that our body can no longer move. The person that maybe you took care of is maybe taking care of you now, or the pace at which we move through our lives might no longer be the pace that we live in now. So when these roles shift, again, it can make us feel like maybe we're not the same person, or you can have feelings like you're disappearing into this person that maybe is unrecognizable, or even dissolving into whatever is left, given the weather. But the role describes what we do, and identity is who we are underneath. And that's very important to remember when you think about sense of self. So if you look here at the left column, we're referring to this as weather, which is going to be transient, not fixed, the work someone did, and the identity that grew from that work. And of course, our work can absolutely influence our identity. I'm not taking that away. But I'm thinking more so along the lines of the daily responsibilities of driving, or deciding, or managing what needs to be managed, whether you were if you were the older child, the one who oversees everything, kind of the boss or the family manager. They could have it looked like a physical role if you were an athlete, a dancer, a runner, someone who had that kind of space, who is no longer to show up in that kind of environment anymore. So I'd really like to ask, have you ever noticed that certain things about you have been as true for as long as you can remember? Maybe as I'm talking about the director or the observer, you feel like time has passed, you've aged, but maybe on the inside you still feel like you're 18, or you still feel like nothing has really changed, which can be absolutely true. The specific way that you find something funny, or the way that you love the people that you love, or the thing that catches your eye, or like the beauty or nature of the world, just something that you've always felt to be true. And it could be the way that your chest tightens when something is unfair or unjust, whether it's happening to you or someone else, and how you always feel the sense of justice. It could be just different personality traits that have always been a part of you. So not so much a job description, but these bits and pieces that you know to be true to you. And it is the felt sense. So held below the language that you have always been the same person in your whole life, even as things have changed, it still survives change. And it could be changes to the brain, or aging, or loss of a loved one. And it survives the ordinary erosion of life. And it's always been with you. So think about roles as the weather, and your identity is like the sky, unchanging. And this is kind of an off ramp, but I felt it was something to just touch on a little bit here. And I didn't want to gloss over loss or hardship of circumstances. There is grief and injury, and not the grief of losing someone else, but the grief of losing a version of yourself. And that grief has no clear end date and it doesn't follow a timeline. And here it says, it doesn't have a funeral, which is, it's true. It's when a certain song comes on the radio, it could show up years after a moment that started or when you thought you had made peace with what happened. Someone I know 10 years after her injury had said something and it stayed with me. She stated, I felt like I was missing me. And I don't think that there's a better sentence to describe what that feels like. Something is gone. You feel like a piece of you is gone or a version of yourself is gone. And naming that grief, even if you just do so privately, even to yourself, makes it easier to hold. And of course, it's not going to resolve it or make it go away, but it makes it easier to carry. And that is where the growth is happening, even if you feel like it's very heavy. And some of you may have noticed that certain things feel clearer now than they used to, whether that's what mattered to you, who your real people are, the people who show up for you and who are in your corner, whether that's friends or family or community, people that you see every now and then, but they're kind of, they're going to be there. You go on your walk, you wave hi, you know that they're going to be there on that 6 o'clock evening walk. Just those that having that stability of knowing. And that clarity did not disappear despite what you've been through. And that kind of growth is not universal and it's not owed and it does not happen for everyone and it does not happen on any particular schedule. It does not make what happened worth it and it does not replace what was lost. So, like I mentioned, I know that this was quite an off ramp from identity, but this is very much important when we're talking about sense of identity and injury. Both things can be true, the grief and the growth, and they're not opposites of each other by any means. Most people who have lived through something as you have carry both, and perhaps they can carry in shifting proportions across the years or even the days or even throughout one single day. Some days grief is louder and some days growth is, and you may feel like one day you're on top of the world and the next, you feel like maybe there hasn't been any traction or growth. So today we're not asking to choose between them. We're just asking to let both be true as you think about identity and growth. Okay. So if identity is a story that keeps being written, and if roles are weather while the self is the sky, and if grief and growth can share a room, then the natural question is, how do we navigate? This sounds very lofty, Katerina. How do I navigate it? What direction do we move in from here? And how do we move forward towards something that I'm wanting to move forward to? Goals and values are not the same thing. So I'd like you to think of goals as destinations. We reach them and they're finished. You get the promotion, you run the marathon, you lose that 5 pounds. You make headway in rehabilitation or you finish a degree. Goals are wonderful. I love goals. I love small, smart goals. And I would not talk anyone out of having them, but they also depend on circumstances and timing and our body's ability or our mind's ability if you have the capacity on any particular day. So when any of those things change, some goals stop being available. While our values work very differently. Values are directions rather than destinations, and we never fully arrive, say, at kindness or curiosity. And, checking integrity off of a list for the day isn't something that we do. We continue to move forward with these small choices at a time, no matter what the ground is doing under our feet. So, say your goal was to go back to a high stress career. You got the go ahead from your doctor. They said, sure, you're golden, go for it. And that goal is no longer available. If you ask yourself, what was that career really doing for you? Why were you really, of course, outside of monetary needs, we all need money to live, but outside of that, what value was it serving underneath? You might find it was leadership or contribution or providing for the people who depend on you. So the goals change, but the value is still yours, and that value is the primary portion of your identity. Leadership is still available to you. It's just the room would be different. So whether that looks like volunteering or contributing in a different capacity, say mentoring someone, um, that's always something to consider too. So I'm going to ask you to do something with me here. And typically, I never like to ask questions on trainings, but these can be something that you just hold internally. So if I'm, asking these questions, by no means do you have to throw anything in the chat. If you feel like throwing something in the chat, that's great too, but you can simply just hold these to yourself. So 3 questions are going to come up on the screen. And there, I want you to sit with them one at a time. And there's nothing to write down, like I mentioned. So the first question is going to be, what still matters to you, even on the hardest days? I'm just going to give you a moment to just think about that. The second is, oh, that's a great response. And the second is, what kind of person do you want to be in your relationship right now? And that could be any relationship. It could be as a parent, as a spouse or girlfriend or significant other or um, parental figure or friend. And then if you had 1 good hour of energy today, what would you spend it on? To me, when I think about this, I think about winning the lottery for energy. Because I know some days I'm lacking, lacking energy, and perhaps you are too. So what would you do? Oh, that's a great one. These are all great responses. And whatever comes up, in the quiet, there's no wrong answer. And if a single word came up that, you felt, maybe I'm just kind of just throwing this out there, that's okay. Whatever, you're holding internally, just keep that and sit on it and think on it later. Oh, that's a great one too. Say connection is one of your values. One's connection was possibly meant to fill a house on a Sunday. Whether that's you had children at one point, maybe you're now an empty nester, you used to have a very busy house, or maybe you don't really have the capacity to be in a crowded space anymore. So maybe connection looks like a meaningful phone call, maybe just once a week. When you gather that energy, like we were just discussing, when you have that energy, you use it for whatever it is that you hold um, valuable. So just for whatever you're able to do, your full presence, whether that's your attention, no distractions, just that one phone call. And it's not a lesser version of gathering. It still holds the same value. It's just expressed differently, and often with more intention. Because if you think about getting together at a large gathering, sometimes you may have that surface conversation, where it's just, hey, how you been? How's, X, Y, and Z, but there's not really value in a lot of the conversation. And sometimes even just sitting on the phone, if you don't have anything to say, is just as valuable. So another one is maybe reading. Maybe learning was a value that you had. And maybe you don't really have the capacity to read, whether that's your attention span just can't take it, or um, I don't know if you're anything like me. I love a good podcast. Sometimes it's really hard to find the time and or just to be able to calm down my mind to read a book. So podcast is great. It's a great alternative if you'd like to continue learning, especially if you like science ones. I love Ologies. She has a very appropriate with less cursing version of it, and it's called Smologies. If that's something that you guys would like to look up, but I love it. It's fun. It's about anything that you can think of, whether it's otters or I don't know. I'm getting way off topic here, but I love a good podcast. Or contribution is your value, which we had touched on previously. Once you love the team at work, or maybe you'd like to mentor or volunteer, however you show up in that capacity, and just seeking those different valuables or hobbies is a really great place to start. And each of these examples, the value continued to remain the same, only that the practice has changed and it looks different and it was adapted with different accommodations. So I just like to touch a little bit on purpose. And purpose is not a lightning bolt by any means. It's not a single moment when the clouds part and a voice somewhere tells you, what you're supposed to do with your life. And if that has happened to you, I would love to hear about it. Um, please let me know. You can drop it in the chat or Reggie will give you my email and we can chat about it. But I would love to hear if your purpose has just always been with you from day one. But for most people, that's not the case. And if, again, some version of has happened to you, then please do feel free to share. But usually, purpose is a thread, and it can show up by a small experience or maybe someone mentioning something, and you're like, I think I really like that. I just had a girlfriend the other day say, I don't know what it is about Boston, but I just know that I've got to be in Boston for some reason. And yes, some people just have that thread where it's like, I don't know what it is about this, but I'd really just like to learn more about XYZ. So it just starts pulling you towards something, and it's just a curiosity that maybe you keep coming back to, or in your private time, it's something that you research or explore, whether that's a person, a place, or a daydream, like I mentioned, that you keep thinking about. And purpose tends to grow in these three specific places. The first is contribution that we had touched on various times. Contribution is very important, just for self-confidence and growth in and of itself, and just really helping other people and teaching what you know, or like I mentioned, mentoring can be helpful. And some of the most purposeful people that I know are the ones walking alongside someone who is 2 years behind them on an adjacent road, whether that's in hobbies or work or in an injury lens or in a creative outlet. And the second is connection. And that's showing up for people in your life, whatever that looks like, or strangers. They don't have to be people that you know. It could be shooting your friend a text or an email or sending a video when you have the energy to. And the third is creation. And creation sometimes gets romanticized. I know when I think about creation, I think I would love to be creative, but I'm the least creative person that you'll ever meet, I think, and in my lens of how I think about creativity. But that's very far from the truth. When I say creation, I don't mean writing a novel or starting a business or making beautiful glazed pottery, which I dream about doing, but I'm no good at it. But I keep trying. And I mean, putting something into the world that wasn't there before. So that could look like a tomato plant on a windowsill, or like I mentioned, a short note to a friend who's been on your mind, or if you're a fan of journaling, or maybe if you're not a fan of writing, you can always dictate an audio journal depending on abilities. Um, and then also too, in a long-term study down here at the bottom, I just want to touch on this briefly. People recovering from significant brain injury has found that one factor that predicts well-being over the decades is whether they have stayed engaged in something that matters to them. So just a little tidbit there. If you just want to think about anything that you could possibly engage in again, if able. So purpose doesn't arrive as a revelation. As I mentioned, it arrives as a small pull towards something. And if you feel a pull right now, however small, pay attention to it. Just go down that road for a little bit. And if it's nothing, then it's nothing. So this is the last exercise of the day. Again, I'm not going to ask you to find your life's purpose for today. That would be ridiculous. And it's not how purpose works for anyone. So just try to think on one thread and one thing that pulls you forward even a little bit. And it doesn't have to be grand. It could be something completely out of left field. Is there something that you've been quietly curious about that you would like to know more about? Um, is there a person or group that you'd like to show up for? Is there something you'd like to create, build, or grow? Is there an experience you've had that could help someone else? Or is there a part of yourself you'd like to get to know better? And I really like the last one. Just personally, when I think about growth and I think about um, family a lot when I think about culture and certain parts of maybe my family history that I'd like to get to know better. So it could be something as simple as that. It doesn't have to be anything large or grand, just something to think on. And these are some great responses here. Thank you for sharing. So, one of the hardest things after a life change is finding the right language for kind of who you feel like now. And like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it's you feel like a different person, you feel like your identity has shifted, or maybe you don't really recognize the sense of self. Probably because the old descriptions may not be fitting. And while absolutely brain injury survivor may be true, but it's not all of you. So here's some different sentences or alternative sentences to try on like a pair of clothes. And if they fit, great. And if you hate them, don't use them. That's okay. You can totally come up with your own sentences. But I am someone who is still learning what I'm capable of. And I love that one. I love all of these. I'm someone who cares deeply even when I'm tired. That could be true. That's relative, I'm sure, on specific days. Some days you just may not give any cares, and that's completely okay. And then giving yourself grace. And that could be one of those. I'm someone who gives myself grace. I'm someone who keeps showing up even on hard days. Again, that could be different. But also giving yourself the language of, even if today was a really hard day, if I wasn't able to get done what I wanted to, or if I didn't make it to my doctor's appointment like I'd planned to, it's okay. Tomorrow's a new day. I'm someone who can move toward what matters, even when the path looks different than I expected. So here's some language. And if you'd like to drop any of your I am someone who that you'd like to share, maybe that isn't on the screen or something that you tell yourself, if you feel like inspiring another, that's okay to share too, or save for the end if you'd like, or even just to think on for yourself. And if you're a partner, a parent, an adult child, or a friend who's walked closely with someone who maybe has brain injury or has been impacted, your own days look differently than they used to as well. And something I have watched over and over in families that I know is that families who find their way have one thing in common, and that is that they do not try to go back, similar to when we were looking at that gold dot on the screen. I said you could be anywhere along this line, wherever that means for you, whether it's the injury or back to when your marriage was doing great, or back to maybe when you had a different temperament. Not trying to go back to that version is best practice. Start telling each other the truth, about who you are, how you envision yourself, maybe what your needs are, advocating for yourself, and then listening to that person. And here's what that could sound like. I'm still me, and I'm also different. I need you to see both. And it sounds like the partner possibly saying, I love you, and I'm changing too, and I want us to figure out who we are together. And it sounds more so like both of them saying, we don't have to have this figured out today. And here are a few starting points that you can pull some language from if needed. So we've talked a lot about identity as a story that keeps being written throughout our whole life. We looked at the differences between roles that shift and self that stays. We sat with reality that grief and growth can live and share in the same room. We talked about values as a compass and purpose as a small thread you can follow. And we tried on some new language for who you're becoming. And all of that is to take with you. If anything here stuck, great. Um, just keep in mind that, these aren't universal statements, or maybe these kind of reflections that I've had today don't really resonate with you, and that's completely okay. And here's some further reading. I kind of did a little mix up here. There are a few books on the screen if you want to keep sitting with any of this at home. The Book of Alchemy is beautiful if you like journaling and prompts for thinking. Hidden Potential by Adam Grant. Um, and then Enchantment by Catherine May is wonderful. So thank you all so very much for spending this time with me today. We're going to stop recording, and Reggie will open up the floor for any thoughts or anything that came up for you during our time together.